Welcome to Job Tales, the podcast where you can listen to dozens of interviews and learn about your potential future favorite job. Troy Campbell is a chief scientist at a creative and artistic focused firm. Super interesting career path where he strives to combine his scientific drive with his artistic mind. You will hear about consumer psychology, Disney Imagineering jobs, brand language, multi-narrative storytelling, the science of choice, and much more. If you want to refresh your memory about behavioral science, listen to Aline Holdsworth's interview, episode number 33. Enjoy! Hi Troy Campbell. I'm very happy to have you at my podcast. I would like to ask you right away, what is it that you do today?
So, hi, my name's Troy Campbell, and I use a scientific mind and an artistic heart to help businesses solve creative challenges, whether that is telling a story, whether that is improving their culture, or whether it's designing something like in the Disney parks or on the Netflix platform.
Amazing. How did you get there?
So, I love stories, so here's a little cutesy story. So I was always the science kid, but I was always more interested in people than protons and art than arithmetic. And I would be in classes and I would be doing pretty well, usually very well, and I just wouldn't feel right. So I'd be in a science class, like a chemistry class and physics, and be doing very well and not feel right. I'd be in a creative writing class and liking a lot of it, but just not feeling the best in there and just not wondering what it was. And then I walked into a psychology elective one day and I was immediately like, oh my gosh, this is me. This is the language that I'm good at, science, and the things I care about, people, art. And we can use these things to understand story, and we can use these things to understand theme parks, and we can use them to better understand our own identity. And it was an amazing, lovely experience. And that was around the mid-aughts, so around 2006, which was a long time before the sort of modern explosion of behavioral science and design psychology stuff. And I discovered it at a wonderful point.
So before we go just a little bit back onto your academic background and what you've done before, can you tell me now, give me an example of what you do, for instance, in a theme park? What is your contribution as a chief scientist?
Yeah, so I'm currently the chief scientist at an organization called On Your Feet, which we describe ourselves as a collision of business, art, and science. And so we'll come into a company and say they have a challenge on making Nike recently had a challenge is they're all coming back to work after the COVID pandemic. And they literally had described, some of them described as, we've forgotten how to play. So how do we help these people understand how to play together? And so it's a combination of designing experiences for them and also giving them training, which is going to combine we'll talk about my background as a professor with the example of like design activity. I used to be one of the consultants around 2018-ish when Netflix was going through a really large remodel of the platform. So the platform back then really was, designed for a world of DVDs where you knew everything on the platform. You were making decisions for something you'd watch 3 days later. And it was not optimized for, it is 10 p.m. on a Sunday and I want to be happy. How do I make a choice? And so what we would do is we'd bring in the science of choice and then the artistic practices of aesthetics and differentiation, how you use different shades of color, like maybe multiple shades of black to signal things, why hierarchical social norms like a top 10 list might be more useful, why descriptions on the app need to be more specific. As I pointed out one time, one of their family-friendly sci-fi shows looked almost exactly the same in description as Black Mirror. And that they needed more differentiation and changing also things. One of the great changes that happened to the Netflix platform was moving away from movie trailers, which are meant to help somebody decide, a choice that is way out in the future, to more a clip that just explains, this is the plot, this is the feel. Do you want to watch it right now? Go for it. And thinking through all those things. And as you can see kind of very quickly in all these situations, if you're going to do something that's really amazing, whether you're designing something at Disney parks, on the Netflix platform, inside of Nike, or you're designing for some of the storytelling we do for brands like sciencey brands like Owens Corning, or entertainment brands like Blizzard or Google, we are going to have to put together so many different things. And when you're able to put together understanding of what how humans think, how humans remember, how humans feel about their identity, but then also are able to put the sort of artistic ways in which how story works, like how story really works,
Hmm.
and how the art of experimentation, and bring those together, you can really add value to people either in a consulting role or in a training role.
I can see from what you're saying, like how much behavioral science must have established really the base of your knowledge. Can you tell me a bit more? Because I've interviewed Aline Hartsworth, which
Yeah.
is actually the reason why we know each other, which is great.
Yes. Yeah.
So for those who haven't listened, it's on episode 33, and she talks about behavioral science. But I would like to you to tell me your version, I'd say,
Yeah.
and then how it helped you craft what you know today.
Yeah, so when I was an undergraduate, as I said before, I was so excited that I discovered psychology, but I quickly felt that it was a little bit more theoretical or not always
Mm,
applied to the type of situations that I wanted to apply it to, such as like theme parks and identity and consumer experiences. And then my undergraduate advisor, Peter Ditto, pulled a book that had recently come out off his bookshelf, Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, and said, I don't think you want to be a psychologist. I think you want to do something like consumer psychology. And I'm like, what is
mm,
that? And he handed it to me. And that was like my second realization, where it's like, oh, you really, really can apply it to this situation. So,
mm,
behavioral science, as I approach it, is the study of how people think and behave broadly. And that is their identity, what makes them happy, how they choose, how they remember things, how they pay attention to things. And it really is all of those things. For instance,
mm,
if you are constructing a commercial, you're understanding the science and art of symbolism, identity, pacing, memory, storytelling, all those different things are there together. And you want to be able to understand those ideally on sort of the artistic level, and that nuances and how to be creative and how it's done by artists before. And you want to understand like why it is when you move a camera down from left to right, it symbolizes something negative unless there's another cue out there. And
mm.
you're putting all these things together to deliver something that is valuable. And as an educator, it is so much fun, because what you can go in is you can go into these companies with the most advanced people in the world, right? They're the Disney Imagineers, they're the Stanford, so the creative Disney Imagineers, the artist people. Lots of those are, we're talking about the artist people over in Imagineering, or like the behavioral scientists that work at Netflix.
Yeah.
And you can then, because you understand both of their worlds, you can help the Disney Imagineer understand the science behind the sort of artistic storytelling, or why Disney rides work. And you can actually help them audit and edit their own ideas in a new way, and sometimes even see opportunities. Like when you're starting a ride and you're having this slow transition at Disney, they call it a portal. Lots of the art people think of it in a metaphor, right? You're going down a rabbit hole, you're entering into a new world. Well, there's actually a lot of science that is relevant to that, such as the anticipation, and there's a
Right.
science of anticipation and a science of mindset shift. And it's really shifting people into the right mindset, not just shifting them, but shifting them into the right mindset. And it can actually help them understand something, even something that they're a world expert on. And likewise with the behavioral scientists, they might really, really understand something like social norms or the science of cues to put on the Netflix platform. But when you bring examples from art and you mix it up, like here's how Van Gogh used every shade of blue and used one color to signal different things. On Netflix, since you have a small color palette, you can't use that many different colors, so it's harder to like signal and draw attention, but you can use different shades, and you can now combine this observation that artists have done with your
Mm.
idea of how attention works, how the mind works, how categorization works, and you can do so much more.
Fantastic. So when you were telling me that when you were in the academic world, of course, you were publishing a lot, and
Mhm.
You're talking about colors, which is a key word that, like, as I listened to you. So, what did you find that first of all, did you find that something was lacking into behavioral science that you wanted to go further? And then, if so,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
when I was in behavioral science, I felt that a lot of times the things that behavioral scientists were finding were not always either immediately actually novel to artists. And a lot of what behavioral science is doing is sort of proving things we already know, which is incredibly valuable. But that
Mm,
wasn't something that I wanted to spend my time doing. I didn't
okay.
want to spend 3 years of my life proving something that I was pretty sure already worked. Um,
Okay.
right? And 100% there has to be people in the world that do that. Has to be, has to be, has to be. And there are occasional times where behavioral scientists will publish something and I will be like, oh, I didn't think of it like that before, even drawing from existing theories. But the big thing for me was that I couldn't publish things that were really, really useful. Because in behavioral science, that really used my sort of mix of scientific mind, artistic heart skill. Because in behavioral science, you really can only publish on one thing at a time.
Really?
And anything, right? So you're saying people deny a problem because they're afraid of the solution. That's one thing that's one of my projects. It's one thing. When people are oversensitized to something due to their egocentric bias, they think other people would be oversensitized when they're not. That's another one of my papers. Those are interesting things, but you can't do something like what I've done, where I've taken story forms and saying, here's a story form called the destiny narrative. And this is a story form in which somebody changes into who they were always meant to be. This is the underlying form that exists inside of Disney movies. It also exists inside of most all folklore stories, like the famous Monkey King story from China. It is in all the commercials that have been in so many commercials that have been successful, like release your inner goddess, embrace
Mm-hmm.
your whatever side, your adventurous side, your Disney
Yeah.
side, your Vegas side. And then you bring in and say, well, the reason that thing works is actually a lot of different reasons. It's working because of ideas around identity, that we want to be authentic, that we'd like people to change and improve, sort of like a growth mindset, but we also want them to sort of stay the same, right? This story that is both about staying the same and changing. And it has coherence theories, it has theories about authenticity, theories about how the mind categorizes something, cultural things, and the way that you actually would teach that to someone, or the way that you would actually use or edit, uses so many more ideas than you can ever publish in a scientific paper, because that's just not how science works.
I see what you mean.
And so the approach is very scientific and academic, but it's not the type of stuff that you can publish.
I see. And so you wanted to veer away from that and follow more of your calling, and which is fascinating because it's very often when you need to make a choice in life, that will bring you to your profession. It's very hard to understand what is it that you like, what is it that you don't. So I'd like to go slightly back in time into the moments that you think were key into making those decisions, like crossroads, to say, okay, starting from your high school into
Mm-hmm.
university and then the PhD and into where you are now. Like, can you find and identify those key points?
Yeah. So I've been asked that question so many times. And one of my simple answers to that is, I think a huge reason the way that I am and many other people are the way they are, or are disappointed in science, is an upbringing in something like sports and art. Because in
Mm,
sports and art, whenever you learn something, you immediately use it and get way better at it. So in sport, if you learn a new way to use a pivot foot, you go out and practice it, and then you pair it with other moves, and you do it bad, and then you do it good, and you keep refining and using that skill. In
yeah.
art, you learn something about color combination or archetypes or stuff, and then you go make films, or just post a cool thing on your social media account. But in science, it's not usually like that. You'll read a scientific finding and you don't go out and use that scientific finding, because what you're supposed to do as a researcher is spend 10 years to publish 10 articles of research, each article of research that can be summarized in about 2 sentences. And I'm obviously oversimplifying things, and
Yes.
I'm using my artistic heart to have some artistic license and exaggeration.
Yes.
Um, but when I went into especially graduate school, I would be so excited by every single paper that we read because I would think, oh, this will change the world. Or, oh, I can use this the next time I DJ because I just learned something about categorization effects. So I'm going to use this song next to this song. Or, oh my gosh, I can use this idea of how identity matters to people on when I design a date so my significant other feels more self-actualized. Or, oh, Disney could use this in this way. And I was just so excited by that constant thing. And in academia, when you read awesome papers, you're often not excited by them because it doesn't help you in any way, because your job, your self worth is only about publishing ideas. And lots of times when you read a cool idea in academia, your first immediate response as a researcher is, damn it, I probably would have thought of that and been able to publish that if they wouldn't have done that, which is so sad because what you want to have a response is, here's an amazing piece of information. I can
Hmm.
go use this now and the world can use this now. And of course I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not so much. Like just the entire different way that I would respond emotively and optimistically to everything that I would learn was way different because I was a person that had always been trained from the arts and sports as you learn something new and tomorrow you use it.
So when you were in your teens, what did you choose to study? Or was it your parents who who chose for you?
So, I mean, if you're a teen in the United States, you're in all your different classes. And so you don't really have that many electives, but the electives that I got to choose from. So I had to do English. I had to do English and literature. I had to do social studies. I had to do sciences and stuff. And I was in an international baccalaureate program, which is sort of like doing a liberal arts
Mm.
education in high school. But in my electives, I would choose events design, journalism, and most importantly, film production. And
Ah, okay.
I was a film major and a creative writing major at the start of college.
There has been more, let's say, more art than science in your earlier years. I'm trying to understand
Yeah, so
your
it was
path.
it was
Mm.
science, but it wasn't the science that I would end up doing because I
Mm.
never took my first psychology class till after I was 18. And
Okay.
so before I found like the core science and the most important palette that I paint with, the science of behavioral science or psychology or whatever term
Yeah.
you most love, it was that I was really, really sciency, but it wasn't this science about people or related to things like art. And then I discovered this thing that I thought that was so relevant. But the more and more I got inside the academic institution, the less and less I felt like I could really, really use it in a way that allowed me to just explore it the way that I wanted or create things that would actually like create many different things that would help people. And there are ways that you definitely can do it, and people do awesome things. And I mean, behavioral scientists every day are publishing things that I am using. So I absolutely love it. But there is this missing translation between the 2 sentence finding in a behavioral science paper and the ability to put it together with 15 other behavioral science ideas and 7 other art ideas to make something.
Hmm. Do you think you have found your balance in the corporate world?
I would say that it is very difficult to find your balance sort of in the corporate world entirely. So, a lot of my favorite projects are often when I'm working with startups, and it's difficult. And I think that we are at a time where the world is first realizing that you can be sciency and artsy together.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I love about my job at On Your Feet is I am the chief scientist at a creative focused firm, an artistic focused firm. So when we go into organizations, we lead with art and then we support with science.
Ah, I
And
see.
that the way that they allow me to interact with them because we are coming in with like we're doing like an innovation day. We're coming in with like professional improvisers and a person who's like a legitimate, amazing street artist and me. Right.
Mm.
And that is such a different relationship that they're willing to have with us. But I don't think in general the world is really that sort of artistic and that creative. And hopefully over the next 10 years, it will become that.
You had to pretty much pave your way to where you are today. There was at the almost the beginning of behavioral science. It was the beginning of creative, and merging the creative and the science aspects into a firm, deploying it into a firm world. But if I were 18 today and I wanted to do what you do, what would I need to do?
I would say that two things. One, get a PhD in your 20s if you can. A PhD is an amazing thing to have. It teaches you so much. You will come out being able to think differently. I really didn't realize how much a PhD would make me think better. I just thought it would let me find things out, like about knowledge,
Okay.
but it helped me think. So if you can get a PhD, get a PhD. But regardless of what you're doing, my best advice is whatever you're doing, it's going to have a vibe. It's going to be businessy, it's going to be artsy, or it's going to be sciency.
Hmm.
Outside of that, go do the thing you're not getting at it. So when I was an undergraduate and I was doing lots and lots of artsy things, I would also go to all these sciency events because it would be sort of the thing that was balancing me out. But then when I
Mm.
became a PhD and I was focused on sciencing all the time, I would spend so much time going to comedy events, going to art shows, just spending time on the internet, finding a community that wasn't on my campus, or at least in my sphere of the people I hung out on the campus.
I
And it's
see.
sort of your job to build your own ecosystem that will support those things. And then here is my potentially favorite piece of advice, and that is do stuff in the real world for small audiences. So, whether that is giving talks at a local library, whether that is throwing parties for your friends, whether that is designing an unbelievably amazing date for your significant other, whether
Hmm.
it's writing wonderful love cards to your parents, where you are able to use all of your skills, you are able to control most of the situation, and you are able to impact people you love, or at least people in your community. And it will be amazing, and it will be often the best practice. And
Hmm.
like when I walked onto Disney Imagineering and they were like, "Oh, Troy, so with your experiment, there's going to actually end up being some events design. Have you done any events design?" And I was like, "Yes." But the answer was I DJ'd large high school dances and done homecoming things. I hadn't
Oh yeah.
done something at a huge Disney thing, but since my skills were, what Disney was hiring me to deliver them, and then I had this other sort of experience in this experience design, that I could combine behavioral science with what I had done as an event on a football field at my high school, right?
Yeah.
Um, and when I sort of work on, the first time I was working on brand language, because they don't really teach you brand language even though I was in a marketing PhD, I really didn't learn how to write brand language. I was a behavioral science researcher within a marketing PhD. So the most experience I had with language was writing personal poetry, writing love notes to significant others and my family. And that really, really is like legitimately, I will steal forms and I will sometimes think, oh, yeah, that poem I wrote my mom about how she was letting her little leaf go when I was 17. I'm going to use part of that metaphor and definitely make it a lot better because it's pretty bad. But there's something in that.
Awesome. No, it's a good advice, and I see why you say it, and it's a great platform for exercising, and you control,
Yeah.
or at least most of it. So, actually, out of curiosity, what was the thesis in your PhD,
What was
your
the
your final
thesis?
thesis? Yeah.
The thesis in my PhD was about the idea of when you feel competent at something, you're more likely to enjoy it more. And
Mm.
so that is enjoying poetry more, enjoying movies more. And the idea, as we say, sort of the takeaway is don't just make great products, make consumers feel great at using your products. And there was, of course, many nuances and things to it, but that is sort of a large takeaway that, as a one-liner, has still been so useful in my career. And people will email me back, 2 or 3 years later and be like, Troy, I'm always thinking about subjective competence whenever I'm working with my sales clients. Troy, I'm always thinking about subjective competence when I'm making my website so people feel smart at my art. And so that was my PhD is that.
We talked about combining science and art. We talked about cultural design. Now, there is a third point you mentioned when you wrote to me. I help people find and tell their own personal stories.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more?
Yeah, so I help people find and tell their personal stories. And sort of two of the story forms that I often find are so useful for people is the story form multi-narrative storytelling, which is how Nike storytells, and destiny narrative, which I think I've already mentioned, which is how Disney does. And
Mm.
I help people take their own story and tell them like that. So let me just give an example with the multi-narrative storytelling. So most people, they worry all the time about what is the one perfect story? How can I tell this epic narrative of me? And the way that most people communicate themselves properly, and all pretty much brands do, is they don't do that. Instead, what they do is they have one core idea, the value that you're bringing. So Nike is the just do it brand or inspiration for all athletes.
Yeah.
Apple is the think different brand. I'm the scientific mind, artistic heart person. One of my amazing students described herself as the get stuff, or the more explicit done girl, where and then what you do is that is kind of this core statement, and then you surround that statement with lots and lots of little stories. So Nike surrounds, so many different stories of athletes. Think different for Apple means Steve Jobs, but it also means Albert Einstein and Amelia Earhart and Yoko Ono, and it communicates that idea.
Yeah.
Scientific mind, artistic heart for me means Disney, but it also means writing poetry to my parents. My get stuff done girl, who is my amazing student, she proudly said, I'm a B student, but I get stuff done. And then she had all these examples. And it's this wonderful way in which the brain, it uses science of how the brain works, which is to form these sort of gestalts that connect things around a center. And when you give somebody a center and you tell stories around that, they can really understand very quickly. And it can be just incredibly useful and a simple tactic. And you can tell your own story with the same swagger, or at least the same form that Nike commercials work.
It's so fascinating. I wish we had like half an hour more, but before before ending, I would like to ask you what's next for you.
What's next for me is, so I've always, so to chart on one point that I like to say is, if you're ever going to really, if you're somebody who really thinks different, it means you always have to really end up doing different things and things people have never been done before. And so what I'm doing is I'm most likely going to launch this brand sometime in the nearish future called Hajduk House. My middle name is Hajduk, Troy Hajduk Campbell. And it will be a full exploration of the scientific mind, artistic heart, where I'll use many different forms to capture and express and explore ideas. So I'll actually have lyrics where I intentionally write lyrics about a topic. I have a recent set of lyrics on blank blues to describe sort of this almost this disassociative state that many people are in right now. I have stories where I write stories based upon sort of a social psychological finding. I have these things called useful takes where they're not hot. they're not definitive, they're just useful and sometimes playfully exaggerated. And so it's combining these sort of artistic ways of going at ideas, but that also have this scientific precision based in it. And it's based on sort of all these things that I've done over the last 10 years as a professor and a consultant with people, where we've used lyrics that I write, lyrics that they write, stories that I tell them, these sort of artistic experiences that where we're sharing scientific findings, but we're also sort of speaking beyond the science in effective ways and trying to put that out there in the real world and doing that. And finding a way to take these things that usually involve a lot of trust and like 2-hour experience and distilling them down into like 300-word things or 3-minute videos has been a challenge, but I'm getting there. And I hope to sort of reveal that to the world. And I think that if I get it right, it'll probably be the proudest thing I've done so far.
Awesome. And for that, I wish you the best of luck and maybe
Thanks.
Rendezvous 2 years from now to talk about it.
Hopefully.
Thank you, Troy. It was very interesting. We have gone over the time, but I couldn't stop you.
Awesome. Thanks.
It's very interesting. Take care. Bye-bye. What a pleasure to talk to Troy. I can't wait to follow his future professional choices. I'm always looking for new jobs to discuss with new guests, so please reach out to me on the website or on the social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Just tap Job Tales Podcast. See you next week.